The beast of Bun is here. The beast of Bun is here. You know it's that time of year. Beast of Bunny. It ain't no fun when the rabbit got the shank. Part 2. Back to Lucasville. In this video, we're going to discuss the 7 unusual facts that are rarely talked about the Lucasville prison riot that happened in the Easter of 1993. And what better way to do it than with a fresh set of ears? And if you've seen my last video where the Easter Bunny made, or should I say the Beaster Bunny made a guest appearance, I had brown ears. Well, how does a Beaster Bunny go from having brown ears to white ears? Well, the brown ears wasn't for me. They're for my wife. I had to go get my white ears. That's right. The white-eared Beaster Bunny is here to tell you about 7 unusual facts that are rarely discussed about the Easter Lucasville prison riot. Welcome to the Pen and The Shank, the most unusual and unique crime and prison channel experience on YouTube, where you get side quest characters like the Beaster Bunny. Man, let's jump into this list. And we're keeping the ears on. Beaster Bunny don't want no ears removed for this video. Number 1, Lucasville prison riot in 1993. Unusual fact. It all started off behind tuberculosis testing. That's right. One of the biggest and most documented yet hidden archival prison riots in the history of America started off because of tuberculosis testing. A chemical compound called phenol made its way to a Muslim, a black Muslim, who found out that phenol was a type of alcohol and that he didn't want to receive this testing because it went against the beliefs of the Quran when it came to alcohol consumption. Inmate Sadiq Abdullah Hassan, also known as Carlos A. Sanders, is considered one of the conspiring ringleaders that kicked off this whole riot in 1993. He was an American prisoner who was in prison, and he converted to Islam while in prison and changed his name like many Muslim inmates do. And he was on his high horse. And he let everybody else know who was a part of Islam inside the prison that, look, these people finna give us a test that goes against the Prophet Muhammad. Now, let me tell y'all something. And I'm going to be real about this one. If this is the reason that the prison riot kicked off, then that means this dude was looking for a reason. Because there ain't no reason that phenol was against the Quran and this dude was living like a savage against the Quran. And he was complaining about phenol, an alcohol substance that was going to be, dotted on his skin so they can give a tuberculosis test. I had tuberculosis testing. You know what I mean? Everybody inside the prison system gets tuberculosis testing. That's how they keep people from dying in prison. Jews get it. Muslims get it. Whites get it. Gangster disciples get it. Everybody gets it. But the reason that this prison riot escalates into an actual prison riot, as crazy as it may sound, and that's an unusual and crazy fact, is because of tuberculosis testing. That's right. A whole prison riot where 10 people lost their lives and it cost an estimated $40 million in damage, right? And multiple news media agencies throughout the world came in and congregated around this prison and made this prison a staple of popularity throughout the world, was all started behind one dude, Carlos A. Sanders, also known as Sadiq Abdullah Hassan, found out that he was going to have to get a tuberculosis test. Boom! I just blew your mind. Number 2. And I'm trying to keep this in chronological order according to what I found in my research. This is very unusual. The Aryan Brotherhood, the black gangster disciples, and the black Muslims all were congregated together on the prison yard. Before this riot kicks off, roughly about a week before it kicks off, officers had reported that they witnessed the shot callers of the Aryan Brotherhood and the black Muslims and the black gangster disciples all congregated near the weight pile on the Lucasville prison L yard unit. And they noticed this and nothing kicked off. Everything was calm and they just took a mental note of it. Nobody wrote nothing down. Nobody alerted the warden that, hey, look, you got shot callers from all the major gangs that should not be congregating together, that usually have their own separate safe spaces away from each other. They're all hanging out talking and it looks like they're conspiring, which they were conspiring. It wasn't until the riot actually kicked off that the warden found out, days after the riot kicked off, that days before the riot kicked off, this happened. And he told his staff, nobody told me the Aryans and the Muslims were hanging out on the weight pile. Boom. This is unusual activity. And any prison guard who is properly trained and educated on prison culture and prison gangs knows if you see something like this, you got to make not just a mental note, but you got to make a phone call to your captain, who's going to make a phone call to the warden, and they're going to figure out what's going on. They'll probably start moving shot callers off the yard because they know, you know what I mean? You've seen, you know what I mean? Blood in, blood out. When Miklo executed Order 66, that's the type of stuff that happens whenever you don't deal with gang meetings on the big yard. Man, this was an unusual event. You just don't see it in prisons. When you see the Muslims and the Aryans congregating, they usually keep each other at arm's length or further, or should I say they keep each other at shank's length or further. Number 3, April 14th. When the riot kicked off, it was April 11th, Easter Sunday. But on April 14th, the Ohio Highway Patrol helicopter crashes after hovering over the prison, and 2 were injured. This is a story that is so strange that in the beginning days of this riot, there is a state helicopter for the Highway Patrol that often does what Highway Patrol helicopters do. It hovers over and it, navigates and watches what's going on. No doubt they were dispatched to the prison to keep an eye on things from, above. It was an aerial surveillance, and they were looking down and they were trying to see if anything was going to kick off, anything was going crazy. And when the helicopter looked down, I can imagine what these 2 dudes were up to, because it was 2 people inside the helicopter when it crashed. Can you imagine the news reporters when the helicopter crashed? Chopper going down. Somebody must have threw a shank at it. Must have been somebody in there with the power of Bullseye from Marvel Comics, and they threw that shank. Bing! And it got there in that rotor blade, and that rotor blade went down, man. So these riots are really dangerous when they start tossing shanks at choppers. Man, that's what's crazy about this riot. And it's so embarrassing to the Highway Patrol in Ohio that helicopter went down. What it was is there was an engine malfunction, and the pilot felt like he had to take it down for an emergency landing. It was 2 people inside. Both were hurt. Both were rushed to the hospital. They survived. They had x-rays and injuries, and they were probably like, look, we're going to keep this under wraps. And the Ohio Police Department was so focused on the prison riot that, like, look, we don't need no more embarrassment. We crashing choppers while we trying to do surveillance. And then they talking about people throwing shanks at the rotors. Oh, man. Number 4, an officer is released on April 16th. And his name was James Anthony Tony DeMons. James Anthony Tony DeMons was the only black guard who was held hostage during this 1993 Lucasville prison riot. He was shuffled around. If you watch my other video, I talk about it. The inmates in the different gangs, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Gangster Disciples, and the Black Muslims all shuffled hostages around from each one of their units that their gang had laid claim to. And they did this to disorientate the hostages. Well, there was one hostage who was a black hostage. He was the only black hostage at all 8 of the hostages that were taken. Initially, the news reported that it was 12 hostages, but come to find out it wound up being 8 hostages. One hostage obviously lost his life before the release of Officer DeMons, and that was Officer Vallingham. He lost his life, and so they're working to get hostages out, and they're willing to get anybody out. Well, what's so weird about it is when Officer DeMons comes out, he's dressed in full Muslim garb. Well, my initial reaction is that these inmates weren't no stupid inmates. The shot callers who were calling shots inside Lucasville, if you go research these dudes, all these dudes aren't stupid dudes. These dudes were strategic. And I believe these dudes had, larger than average IQs to pull off some of the stuff that they pulled off as the shot callers of the AB and the black Muslims. And I thought initially the Muslims dressed that officer up in Muslim garb, so they were familiar with the Attica prison riots. And so they had all known what happened in Attica. So they must have thought that, hey, look, when the guns come in blazing, they're going to be blasting anybody who looks like a convict. And so they figured if they dressed the officers up like Muslims or ABs, that when the state police and Ohio Department of Corrections came in and started boom, 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 blasting, they would also blast their own and friendly fire. And a strategic move was to dress one up as a Muslim. Nah, but that wasn't the case. The dude, what makes this so unusual and unique is Officer Anthony James DeMons. He actually converted to Islam while the riot was going on. Somehow or another, his mind got indoctrinated to become a Muslim while he was in the prison. So when he gets released as an officer, he walks out walking like a Muslim, talking like a black Muslim, and ready to, power for the people. You know what I mean? And when the other officers see this, they feel like he betrayed them. So the other, hillbilly white officers were like, oh man, he done betrayed us, that boy. But the state and the leadership of the state of Ohio, one was a black woman who was also in leadership for the Ohio Department of Corrections. She came and she spoke, and they all said, and she wasn't the only one, a white officer who was in charge also in Ohio. He also said, look, we don't care what the officer converted to or didn't convert to. All our only concern is to get them out safely. He got out safely. It wasn't until days later that he said no, or was it weeks and months later, he did interviews and he said, no, I didn't convert. I only said that to get out. And so the story flips and flops, and it's a very unusual and unique story that you cannot find a lot of information about because Officer DeMons hasn't spoken a lot about it. He has had interviews about it, but he hasn't said much on it. It's something you'd have to jump into that rabbit hole. The Beaster Bunny got to do some digging to find out about Officer DeMons. Did he become a full-fledged black Muslim part of the prison gang culture? Or did he go back to correctional officer staffing? I don't know. Beaster Bunny got to dig more into it. But for now, that's all I got on Officer DeMons. The next thing that's really, really interesting is the only officer who lost his life in the Ohio Lucasville prison riot was Officer Robert Vallandigham. And he was unalived at some point or another due to the fact that some inmates claim he saw too much. He witnessed the shot callers, initially take over the prison. And because he saw too much, the shot callers all decided that he had to go. And so I'm assuming that's how they chose him. Here's the thing. The people who were convicted for unaliving Officer Vallandigham, they all claim that they're innocent. They weren't the ones who ultimately took his life. Now, they were part of the leadership who led the riot. One guy specifically, inmate George W. Skates, he says that he had nothing to do with it. And to this very day, he sits on death row and his age is deteriorating and his health condition has deteriorated drastically. And he claims that, listen, I'm going to fight this until I ain't got no more breath in me, because all 5 of these dudes are still alive that they tried and convicted for the death of Officer Vallandigham. And what's interesting is this prison is the longest lasting prison riot in the history of America. 11 days is a long time for a prison riot to go on. There are some other prison riots that were more brutal than this one, but none lasted as long as this one because of the strategy and strategic moves that the inmates inside the prison, I believe, took to prepare, and the drastic measures they did to make sure that this riot would fall on their behalf. Also, the unpreparedness of the Ohio Department of Corrections to even allow this to happen by being understaffed and having a prison, overcrowded. So what makes it interesting about Officer Vallandigham is that his funeral actually occurred while a riot was still going on. His funeral was on April 19th. The riot started on April 11th. And they literally had his funeral while they were still working on negotiations with the inmates inside of unit inside Lucasville prison. It's just a really interesting thing. And I'm gonna put some pictures of the funeral procession for Officer Vallandigham. And remember, on the Pen and The Shank, the most unusual and unique crime and prison channel experience on YouTube, we always consider the victims. And in this case, Officer Vallandigham is the victim, and we want to show respect to him, and we want to show respect to his family, and we want to say, God bless Officer Vallandigham. And before you start crying about him being a bad officer, all accounts from the inmates' perspective and inmates' point of view, all the inmates said that he was one of the good officers. So one of the good guys inside the prison system, who's a correctional officer who we should be rooting for, who we wish should have lived, is not with us. It's just unfortunate that one of the good guys had to lose their life, because I know they got demonic and evil correctional officers, just like they got demonic and evil convicts. You know what I mean? But Officer Vallingham, from all accounts, was one of the good guys. Another, and to me, the most interesting fact and most unusual and unique fact about the Lucasville prison riot, I want y'all to stay with me on this one, because this is, to me, is the most interesting thing, was the Vietnam veterans' involvement in the preparation of the Lucasville prison riot. It is said that because the inmates had the manual on how to deal with prison riots, because they took over the L unit and they got all the training material from the staff's area, and the part of the, prison and L unit where the captain had all this stuff, the wardens had their stuff, all the paperwork. They read the manuals on how to deal with riots. Well, they also had prison books on what happened in Attica. Well, the fact that they actually took the time to read this stuff is amazing. These inmates were in there trying to really figure something out. If these dudes would have had a different card dealt to them in life, or they would have made different decisions, they probably would have been phenomenal, strategists inside the military. But unfortunately, this is where they are, on death row. But there were Vietnam veterans inside that prison, and the Vietnam veterans helped the shot callers build barricades and booby traps for the possibility of the prison and the state police taking the prison back with force. They knew they were going to come in with guns a-blazing, and they knew what happened at Attica, and they had a fortress designed, and you could see in some of the film footage when the police go in and the pictures taken that there's bunks built like mazes. Well, some of the Vietnam veterans were trained in explosives, and they made makeshift devices out of lighters, big lighters, and they made some IEDs inside the prison, and they were planted strategically in different locations to go off. They had Rambo-style booby traps, like First Blood. And it was all because there were Vietnam veterans inside this prison. I would love to hear the perspective of inmates who spoke directly to the Vietnam veterans. Listen, there's a ton of information on the Lucasville prison riots, but to get down to what the truth is, it's hard, because the state don't want nobody to know the complete truth. And one of the things that I wish we knew more about was the veterans from Vietnam who served in Vietnam and did tours in Vietnam and fought in Vietnam, who were in Lucasville when this happened. And what were they thinking when they gave the advice to the shot callers and they helped design a maze of horror that the guards would have stepped into? And I think it would have meant a loss of life for some of the hostages and possibly some of the officers who were coming in guns a-blazing. It could have got really, really bad, y'all. You know what I mean? Think about that. Vietnam vets inside prison strategizing against the staff. This was a crazy prison riot, to say the least. It was definitely unusual and unique. And the last thing that I found, number 7, and this is the final thing, was that there's a rumor that one of the inmates, George Skates, has a daughter who made herself known after the fact. Her name is Erin Bunner, and she became an advocate for the Lucasville 5. That's the 5 inmates. Like I said, they're all on death row, advocating for them as they're all being innocent, and that there's no physical proof that any of these 5 men committed the unaliving of Officer Vallingham. And here's the thing, too. The only reason that these inmates received the death penalty was because of the death of Officer Vallingham. It wasn't because of the death of the other 9 inmates that lost their lives in there. We don't know who physically took the life of any of the 10 people who lost their lives, because it was pure chaos. It was a riot, right? And so they were relying on testimony from other inmates who made plea deals to save their own butts. You know what I mean? Almost 4 or 5 dozen inmates turned state evidence not to receive the death sentence and to escape it. Other members of these cars, went state's evidence. You see the stuff happen all the time. Well, George Skates all of a sudden has this lady, Erin Bunner, who pops up. From what I can find online, it's very obscure, but the fact that somebody would pop up and say he's my father, and I don't even think there is a connection for George Skates to be her father, it's a really weird dynamic that ties this whole thing, this whole prison riot, into one of the most unusual and unique prison riots in the history of not just the United States of America, but the world. You can go down a true rabbit hole, no pun intended, on the possibilities and the endless stories that connect to stories, almost like a rabbit hole labyrinth. that leads you to an unusual and unique experience that you might have to stop and say, wait, I can't take all this information in. It's just too much. No more rabbit ears for me. Back to reality. Give me a like and subscribe to the Pen and the Shank, the most unusual and unique crime and prison channel experience on YouTube.